And so welcome today to our webinar on Join the Global Movement for Gender Equal Finance and Safe Water for Women. The session is jointly hosted by IAX and water.org. And today we will be sharing more about the Orange Bond Initiative and how you can get involved. In particular, we will hear from two steering committee members, IAX and water.org, on their upcoming transactions, including the Women's Livelihood Bond 6, and also water.org's initiatives in building market-driven solutions to financial barriers for water and sanitation. The Orange Bond Initiative is a global coalition to develop the world's first gender lens asset class by and for the Global South and the 99%. My name is George Stopczynski, and I'm Associate Vice President in the Innovative Finance team at IAX, and I will be the MC for today. Now I will kickstart the session with some participant tips. All attendees will be kept on mute during the webinar, but we invite you to share your comments via the chat button on the bottom left as you listen in. There will be additional information posted from our team in the chat throughout the session, but please post your questions at any time during the session by clicking on the Q&A button on the bottom right panel on your screen. We will address any questions in the Q&A segment at the end of the session. If you run into any technical issues, my colleagues Raina and Aman are on standby to help. Please drop them a message in the chat. And please note the session today is being recorded. Now to the agenda for today. We will start with an overview of Orange Bond Initiative, followed by a brief introduction of water.org and IAX. After which, we will move on to IAX's upcoming issuance under the WLB series and go into the sectors, geographies, and borrower criteria and product features and timeline of the offering. Water.org will also then give an overview of their initiatives, Water Credit and Water Connect, and how you can be a part of their mission. We will have time to take questions at the end, and we'll open to a Q&A then as well. And so now we'll move on to the speakers for today. From IAX, we have Ms. Natasha Garcha, Senior Director in our Innovative Finance team and Gender Lens Investing Specialist. Ms. Garcha has dedicated many years to IAX's Gender Lens Investing initiatives, impact measurement work, and a structuring of the Women's Livelihood Bonds. She also now co-leads IAX's efforts within the Orange Bond Initiative Steering Committee, and we'll be sharing more on this later on. From IAX, we also have Ms. Marla Kaur, the Senior Vice President of Credit Portfolio Management at IAX. She manages the credit risk for the portfolio entities in Southeast Asian markets, and she'll be providing a brief introduction of IAX today. We also have Ms. Ruby Jory, the Senior Vice President of Credit Portfolio Management as well at IAX, and she manages the credit risk for portfolio entities in the Indian and African markets. She will share information about the sector, geography focus, borrower criteria, and the timeline in WLB6. And from water.org today, we have Mr. Siddharth Durgavanshi, Global Lead for Financial Institution Partnerships at water.org. Mr. Durgavanshi's work focuses on the technical assistance on product development, partnership development, and capital market advisory. And so with that, we'll kick off today's session, and we have Ms. Natasha Garcha to provide an overview of the Orange Bond Initiative. Ms. Garcha, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Such a pleasure to be here talking about a very timely initiative at a time where we all understand that one of the biggest parts of the climate crisis we're all facing is water shortages and water stresses, and also the very critical role that women play in addressing this paradigm in which you see, on the one hand, you would assume that women are disproportionately affected by climate change and therefore bear the worst of the water stresses that we're seeing across emerging markets all over the world. And on the other hand, they have such a close relationship with water as a resource that they are in fact very well positioned to solve it. So we're very proud to be partnering with water.org on this webinar. IAX and water.org have an inherent gender lens, and IAX, of course, is a women-owned, minority-owned firm, and as you can see, many of us are women ourselves. So thank you all very much for joining us today to discuss this topic. The Orange Bond Initiative is really drawing out from the color of SDG 5, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 5, focused on gender equality. The mission of the Orange Bond Initiative is to mobilize $10 billion by 2030 to advance gender equality worldwide and to empower 100 million women, girls, and gender minorities, with a big focus on actually blending orange, green, and as a subset of green, orange and blue, which means we are focused also on climate action and women as solutions, not as victims. The objective of the Orange Bond Initiative is very similar. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Green Bond movement, is of course also to set a set of guiding principles, which is available on the Orange Bond website and was published last year. It is also to facilitate the mobilization of capital through Orange Bond transactions, and you will hear of an upcoming Orange Bond transaction. And we warmly invite any enterprises on the call to apply if you are looking for funding and you have a gender lens. We also are doing an extensive amount of work to build the ecosystem. And I think this is a very important part of the work. This is one of the big reasons that IAX and Water.org are on the steering committee for this movement, is really so that we can share market intelligence, data and analytics, measurement tools, and other practitioner-focused support so that we can go beyond talking about gender equality as a strategy and actually focus on action and mobilizing transactions and capital. If we go to the next slide. I'll talk about the broader Orange movement for a moment. And I think a big part of this has always been to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm sure many of you are familiar, again, like I said, with the Green Bond movement, which is very much driven by Europe, and they are leaders. The largest issuances, I think 40% of the Green Bond issuances come out of Europe. And that is also because the standards were set by Europe. And now the rest of the world is getting engaged. IAX has been on the advisory council for ICMA. With the Orange Bond Initiative, we wanted to take a slightly different approach. It is really focused on making sure every part of the world, including the global south, has a seat at the table and a voice in how things are shaped. And I think this makes it very distinct from all the other asset classes out there. The Orange Bond movement has participation from the steering committee, ranging from the US Development Finance Corporation to Australian DFAT. It has UNCDF on the advisory council. We have Nuveen, one of the largest sustainable debt investors in the world. We have IAX, Water.org, of course, and we're joined by ANZ and Sherman & Sterling in the private sector. It's a diverse group of steering committee members, and we have 73,000 signatories across the world, which is truly fantastic. We're particularly proud that signatories come from all 6 continents, and majority of the signatories actually come from the global south. And this is really showing that this asset class is really dedicated to those people who are at the last mile and who have traditionally been left out of decision making, both in terms of policy and in terms of capital markets. So we're looking to shift that equation. If we go to the next slide, I'll wrap up just by saying, what are the Orange Bond principles and what is sort of the underpinning guidance that we have for developing the Orange Bond that IAX is going to issue at the end of the year. The Women's Livelihood Bond series has always complied with these sort of standards, and our Women's Livelihood Bond 6, which will be issued, is also going to be in compliance with the Orange Bond principles. Principle 1 really focuses on gender positive capital allocation. So if you're an entity on the call, we are looking for entities which demonstrate that their products, their services, their supply chains, or their workforce are focused on gender equality. You either have that as a majority of your focus, or you are able to ring fence funding specifically to grow out that part of the business that would make you eligible to be a part of an Orange Bond issuance. Principle 2 focuses on the gender lens, capacity, and diversity in leadership. I think it's very easy for us to come and tell enterprises what we think they should do in terms of gender equality. But I think it's also important for issuers like ourselves to reflect on how are we practicing gender equality. There are many bond issuances across the world where there's no women represented on the investment committee, no women represented on the bond structuring committee, and very few people of color making any investment decisions at all. If you're an Orange Bond, that won't work. You actually have to make sure you have both gender equality and racial representation across the people who are making the decisions for what actually qualifies as an Orange Bond and how you're constructing your issuance. And I think that's also a wonderful way to shift the power dynamics and to celebrate the fact that Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Pacific Islands are actually now at the forefront of solving some of the global challenges we're seeing today. And finally, Principle 3. Focuses on transparency in the investment process and reporting. If you are an entity in an Orange Bond, you will be required to do extensive reporting. We, of course, as an issuer, will support you quite a lot with that entire process. So we don't leave it to you. We actually take a lot of it on. And I think the most powerful part of that is we actually make sure as an orange bond issuer that we are checking with the women at the last mile on whether the funds were received and also how the funds were used to impact or transform their lives and the lives of their communities. And I think, again, this goes back to our original point that who should have a seat at the table and a voice at the table. It's not just the issuers, the investors, the bankers. It is also the women who we are all trying to serve and we're trying to empower, because they in turn are really the backbone of society today. With that, thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to George to move forward with the session.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gotcha, for providing a background on the Orange Bond Initiative. Now, I'd like to pass it over to Ms. Kaur to give a brief overview of what IAX does. Ms. Kaur, over to you.
Thanks, George. Good day, everyone. We're delighted to be with you here. Some of you already know IAX, and for the rest of you, I'll just take this opportunity to introduce IAX. IAX is a Singapore-based company founded by Professor Durreen Shanaz to help connect back streets to the Wall Streets of the world in mobilizing capital and mainstreaming impact. IAX has been dedicated to developing inclusive financial system. Our work spans across 57 countries, has unlocked close to $300 million of private capital and positively impacting over 159 million lives. So since inception in 2009, IAX growth includes conceptualizing the world's first social stock exchange with a setup of IAX to help support businesses providing development solutions to scale successfully. It also includes conceptualizing the world's first social exchange and launching the WLB series, the Women's Livelihood Bond series, which is the world's first gender lens instrument to be listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange. Also, the other milestones include launching the Women's Capitalist Fund, the Inclusive Growth Facility Credit Facility. Later in 2021, IAX launched a bond, the WLB4 Climate, that was both gender and climate focused. And in 2022, launched the Orange Bond as the world's first asset class in gender bonds. So some of the other milestones include building the world's largest crowdfunding platform for impact investing, as well as creating IAX Values, which is an impact verification tool. So with that, we'll just move on to the next slide. Coming to the Women's Livelihood Bonds, these bonds are based on a three-pronged approach of providing capital based on risk, return, impact framework. The WLB series builds gender equal markets through innovative finance. So back in 2017, IAX launched the first social bond with a gender lens to be listed on the stock exchange, the WLB1. Later in 2020 and 2021, IAX issued 3 more bonds in the series, empowering women to drive COVID resilience and build back better. Later in 2022, IAX issued the world's first multi-country and multi-continent orange bond, the WLB5, impacting 300,000 women and girls across Asia and Africa. The WLB series has mobilized close to $128 million and empowered close to 1 million women across Asia and Africa. IAX continues to scale these series with partners such as ANZ Bank, Standard Chartered, DBS Bank, DFC, KOICA, and governments such as the US, Australia, United Nations, among others. Also, you'll see on the right side that IAX has received several prestigious awards, including the 2017 Oslo Business for Peace Award. So just that's a quick introduction on IAX. And with that, I will pass it back to George. Over to you, George. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kaur, for the overview on IAX there. And now I'll pass it over to Mr. Durgavanshi to give a brief introduction on water.org and some of their work. Mr. Durgavanshi, over to you.
Thanks, George. It's a privilege to partner with IAX on Orange Bond Initiative. A quick overview about water.org and what we do. Water.org is a US-based nonprofit founded by Gary White and Matt Damon. We are working at the intersection of water sanitation, access to water sanitation, and finance. Affordable access to water and sanitation is a humongous global problem. There are barriers and market failures that contribute to this problem, and prominent among them is access to capital or finance. We, along with our partners, have demonstrated that water and sanitation financing is a viable and scalable opportunity. Over the years, our partnerships have resulted in mobilization of $4.4 billion capital across 11 markets, benefiting over 55 million lives. And our partnership with IIX is part of such efforts. Our partnership network includes financial institutions, investors, and utilities. So that's for now. We'll discuss more about our partnership approaches in the next few slides. Over to you, George.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Kavanchi, there for giving a little overview on water.org, and we look forward to hearing a little bit more later on. And so now I'll pass it over to Ms. Jory, Senior Vice President in the Credit Portfolio Management Team at IIX, to talk a little bit more about the upcoming issuance in the WLB series. Ms. Jory, over to you.
Thanks, George. Thanks. And hello to everyone. And we're very glad to have everyone joined in today for this webinar session. Could we move to the next slide, please? Right, so as my colleague Mala mentioned, we already issued the world's first orange bond last year in December, the WLB5, despite the tough market conditions. And as mentioned, it was listed on the SGX. And over the next 4 years, it is set to empower up to 300,000 women and girls across Asia and Africa. So what you see on the slide is a distribution of the loan share by country and by sector. By country, India, Indonesia remain a major chunk of the distribution, also spread across Kenya, Cambodia, and the Philippines. By sector, microfinance by nature remains a big contributor to us, also spread across and diversified well in terms of sector is across SME lending, sustainable agriculture, water, sanitation, hygiene, even clean energy and affordable housing. Next slide, please. And we'd be delighted to tell you the next bond issuance is also going to be an orange bond. And the slide across shows the countries and sectors we focus on. Of course, the focus being on Africa, South Asia and Southeast Asia, covering countries like Cambodia, India, Indonesia, Kenya, Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. Our focus remains on high impact sectors, like I mentioned, ranging from sustainable agriculture, clean energy, water and sanitation, affordable housing, and financial inclusion. Next slide, please. A little more on what actually are the benefits that entities that become a part of the WLB portfolio stand to gain. There's quite a list, so I'll list a few here. What the first thing that comes to your table for the entity is global recognition, being a part of such orange bond issuances that is under the overarching theme of a social bond series, and gaining that amount of international media coverage. Also linked to this is an exposure to investors through our database of more than 1,200 impact investors, where entities are able to demonstrate what they actually do on ground to this global list of investors. As I mentioned earlier, we are listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange, and that lends a lot of credibility, reputation, and traction from investors being a part of a listed security. As this for the speed of transaction, it has well-defined timelines and it's well-structured to close in within 6 months, and companies stand to gain from a very proper end-to-end process. Another key highlight is the impact evaluation that the companies receive through a proprietary impact assessment platform, which helps link the company's impact outcomes to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. A little more on who is actually eligible to be a part of this bond structure, or the WLB6, which is for the upcoming year. I'll actually go in an anti-clockwise manner if you can follow through on the slide. We look at financially sustainable entities or entities with operational viability and entities that have generated profit in 2 of the last 3 years. Here, I'd like to mention that if it's an early stage or young entity, we do look at it on a case-to-case basis. If the entity can demonstrate to us a path to sustainability and profitability, we'd be happy to engage. We ideally prefer to look at entities that have had external audits conducted for them and have unqualified auditor opinions, at least for the last 5 years. We understand the capital requirement of the company to be in the range of 3 to 10 million to be a part of the bond series. Any familiarity with foreign lenders is a good positive, but it is not a must. We are happy to engage and would happy to sort of initiate discussions with you. The countries, like I mentioned, are in focus in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa. The sectors and the impact on women remains crucial. The sectors, like I mentioned, are financial inclusion, WASH, and clean energy, also skills development and sustainable apparel. If you work in that space, we'd be happy to have a discussion with you. Like my colleague Mala mentioned, this is for the benefit of women, and we look to understand if your operations benefit women from underserved communities. These could be as women in management, heading the firms, or women-owned businesses, like I mentioned, or even as employees, suppliers, clients, or customers. We would like to see where women are benefited in the value chain of that entity. I'd also like to mention that these criteria are laid out, but they're not so strict, and we'd be happy to engage if there is a path to impact that we can discuss through, and on balance, we can help you magnify your impact. We'd be happy to discuss and engage. Next slide, please. I think you'd be curious to understand what the facility actually means and what the key terms are. So I'll go over it in brief over the 7 key points of the structure. It is structured as senior debt, and it will be a single tranche disbursement towards Q4 of this year. So 2024, Q4. The utilization of the proceeds are only for expansion purposes. And of course, we will monitor the use of proceeds. These cannot be utilized for refinancing existing loans or for funding short-term working capital requirements. We are structured as long-term patient capital, so it is a 4-year loan. The interest payments to WLB are to be made quarterly, and the principal payment is supposed to be made as a bullet at the end of the 4th year. That is at maturity of the 4-year loan period. As my colleague Mala had mentioned, the interest rate or the coupon bearing on the loan is based on a thorough risk return impact assessments across 3 dimensions, and that's how we arrive at the rate. Additional parameters which are considered are, of course, the macroeconomic environment in the local region, the country level interest rates, and a credit positive there would be whether the entity can provide any additional collateral or security arrangements, an example there being on the slide of parent guarantees. So on the currency side, IX is inclined to provide loans in local currency, which helps the borrower's operations, or in US dollars. This depends on what the economics of the hedging arrangement in that local market are. Like the slide mentions, local currency is preferred in most cases, and the hedging costs will be reflected in interest rates on local currency loans. Point 7 covers what we typically do in terms of engaging with entities that are early stage or growth stage. So we typically look to receive, along with the debt structured financing that we're providing, we hope to have some sort of warrants or an equity upside stake in the entity so that we can sort of be a part of the growth journey of the entity. Next slide, please. This slide actually covers the timelines and the costs involved. It's divided into 6 main stages, actually. We are sitting somewhere, of course, at a mix of stage 1 and 2 right now. While we speak, we are actually screening numerous entities to be a part of the bond portfolio and also beginning due diligence on a few. This due diligence is actually, it covers both credit and impact verification. Impact verification also being done on ground with the beneficiaries themselves. Next step would be the loan approval process, which is likely to begin in July this year, where we negotiate the key terms of the loan, the collateral requirement, and of course, pin down on the commercials of how this lending would look like. While we do this as the credit portfolio management team, the investor relations team, or the innovative finance team, as we call it, helps or supports with the capital raise. And we sort of converge this together, closing in on to the disbursement in Q4 of this year. Once the entity is onboarded, the monitoring process starts over the next 4 years, where the slide mentions what sort of quarterly and monthly requirements we'll have, and the entities are required to furnish this to us. We also do a semi-annual impact reporting to our investors, covering both the credit and operational standing of the entity and the impact they have made. In terms of the costs, IX covers most of the costs. The rest that have to be covered by the entities, of course, is the credit due diligence and the impact verification cost, which split between $35,000 and $25,000 respectively. This sort of covers the thorough due diligence. Like I said, we undertake both for credit and impact verification on ground for all of our borrower entities. A small annual cost of $100 is also taken to verify impact with the women on ground each year through the 4-year loan tenure. Next slide, please. Over to George, and happy to take any questions later. And thanks everyone for joining. We hope to see a lot more participation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Uribe, for giving a good overview of the upcoming Women's Library on the 6th. I see that we have had many questions throughout the Q&A, so it's great to see those, and we'll get to those at the end. And now I'll pass over to Mr. Durgavanshi to talk a little bit more about water.org and its work within the Orange Bond Initiative, creating a cross-cutting asset class. Over to you, Mr. Durgavanshi.
Thanks, George. So a quick facts here on water and sanitation finance. So access to safe water and sanitation eludes a large number of people. For example, 1.7 billion people lack access to proper sanitation facilities. Over $260 billion per year is estimated to be lost in health and time costs. The financing gap to address this challenge is more than $114 billion per year. So these numbers point to the magnitude of the problem and the size of the market opportunity as well. Next slide, please. So our smart solutions and the approaches that water.org came up was basically to address access to finance for affordable water and sanitation facilities for low-income communities. On the supply side, we work with utilities to improve their capacity building. We provide them training, and we enable them to access finance from the local financial institutions. We also work with financial institutions and utilities to connect them to capital markets. IAX is one example, and Orange Bond Initiative is part of this initiative. We also work with governments and regulators to address policy barriers around capital flows to the water and sanitation finance. So our solutions, which we have developed over the last 15 years, has been proven to be scalable and replicable across 11 markets till now. Next slide, please. So SDG 6, or global goals, sits at the intersection of other global goals. Improved access to water and sanitation finance has a ripple effect beyond positive health outcomes for a household. It improves their productivity, it improves the savings in health and time costs, and improves the overall income. So the improved access to water and sanitation has an income enabling effect on communities. It is not just a consumption aspect. And this in turn makes such communities a better market for enterprises serving them. With that, I'll pause and happy to take questions. Over to you, George.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Durgavanshi, and thank you very much, our speakers for today, for sharing a little bit more about both IX and water.org and your initiatives. And now we'll move to the Q&A. So please, as mentioned, there is a button at the bottom for Q&A questions. You can pop any questions within there anonymously or not, and we'll get to them across the session now. And so we'll just go through some of the questions here, and I'll invite Ms. Guar, Ms. Jory, and Mr. Durgavanshi to come in as and when, and I can answer on some of these as well. And so We'll start with one here. As a potential borrower, how can I improve my eligibility for Orange Capital? And so here, perhaps I can start and talk a little bit about, some of our bits and some of our work, but also how you can be more eligible for Orange Capital with what we do. And so IAX, and through the Orange Bond Initiative, we've created this initiative essentially to enable borrowers from all sectors to come into the Orange Bond Initiative. And so principles were built for issuers of capital to include a variety of companies and sectors, and to have that adaptive gender lens. So no matter what your sector or nature of your business is, we're able to support you developing that gender lens, as long as you have a desire to, but also a starting point in your gender lens journey. There's not necessarily a one size fits all approach. It would be tailored for each borrower. Through IAX and our work within the WLB5, which was actually the world's first orange bond, we included entities from across sustainable agriculture, microfinance, water and sanitation too. And that's why we partner with companies such and organizations such as water.org to enable gender equality to hit all these different markets. And for WLB6, we will be working with entities to develop that company-specific gender action plan as well. And I think a great way to stay in touch and get involved in sessions like this is really to sign the pledge. We do have a digital pledge online for the Orange Bond Initiative. There's no financial resource or time commitments, but essentially by signing that, you can get invitations to these sessions. You can be part of that conversation. And when there's orange bond transactions coming up and more capital raising features coming, you can get involved in those accordingly. And so now potentially I'll move on to Christina Lassa-Oreta's question here, and I touched on it a little bit there as well, but perhaps I can pass over to Ms. Jory or Ms. Kawar to talk a little bit about, the types of businesses that we've worked in previously on the WLB series. And perhaps Mr. Gavanshi, you want to touch on water.org and perhaps how you can work with entities and improve their water capacities as well and their gender.
Thanks, George. So to simply answer that question, and my colleague Survi had covered this in the slides, we're looking at entities operating in the high impact sectors such as sustainable agriculture, clean energy, water and sanitation, financial inclusion, fisheries, skill development, sustainable apparel. In the past, we've had borrowers in the bond, which are in sectors such as clean energy, financial inclusion. Also, what's most important is, because this is a women's livelihood bond series, we're looking at entities who have, operations benefit women from underserved. They could be from rural, low-income communities. And basically, we're looking at how the operations and the whole supply value chain impacts or benefits women. It could be either as employees, as customers, clients, or as suppliers. To name a few, we had borrowers, for example, in the agriculture space. There's an entity who borrowed capital from the bond to buy or purchase raw materials from women farmers in south of India. So these were basically marigold flowers to help produce medicines. So therefore, in a way, the company helped employ women, which were suppliers to the entity. Another example is a microfinance company, and of course, the loans and products help benefit women. So these are some of the examples of the borrowers we've had in the past. And I hope that answers your questions, but please feel free to reach out to us and we can see how, if you don't have a gender lens built, we can help build that, as well as a climate action plan for your entity. Towards the end of the Q&A, we'll also share with you how you can reach out to us and we can have a separate dialogue on that. Over to you, George.
Perfect. Thank you very much there, Marla, for providing a little bit more information on that one. And so now perhaps we can look at a little bit, there's a couple of questions here on the criteria around, the WLB being featured in the WLB6 and in an upcoming orange bond. And so perhaps here I can pass over to Ms. Joy to answer, what if my company has no history of international borrowing or investment, and maybe shed light on whether that's a deciding factor in it?
Thanks, George. Though I missed the first bit of the question, could you please repeat that?
Sure, absolutely. And so what if the question is, what if my company has no history of international borrowing nor investment? Right.
Thanks. Very valid question. And like I'd mentioned, it is not a deterrent and should not discourage you from applying. All of these proposals are looked at a case-to-case basis, and it's a wholesome approach that is taken in terms of understanding the credit, the operations, the financials, and the impact, of course. So not having international borrowing experience is definitely not a deterrent, and we encourage you to apply. And there are a lot more factors that go into assessing you as an eligible entity for the bond. I hope that answers.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And then perhaps now I can touch on to another question on criteria, and Ms. Kawar, maybe you can come in on this, but does a company have to be an orange bond signatory in order to be a part of WLB6?
Hi, George. So I'll take that one. Thanks. So we would actually urge you to sign the pledge, although non-mandatory. And what happens when you sign the pledge? By signing the pledge, you're basically affirming your commitment to the achievement of the Orange Bond and its mission to empower women and girls by unlocking $10 billion by 2030. So basically, you're helping support these objectives to help build a gender-empowered financing system, help mobilize capital, and to fast-track gender equality. So again, once again, urging you to sign the Orange Bond Pledge. There is, as such, no time, resource, or financial commitment involved, but rather just a show of support for this initiative. Thank you. Over to you, George.
Perfect. Thank you very much there, Marla. And so I'll touch on here. There's one for Waters.org and eligibility criteria as well. So perhaps, Mr. Govanchi, I'll pass over to you. But what is the eligibility criteria for entities to be considered for different types of support for Water.org?
So we look at financial institutions that are at the growth stage up to mature stage that are serving low-income population. They need to be profitable, ideally. And our support involves technical assistance on product development, marketing, market assessment, demand generation from the operational area markets. It's not around direct financial support. We facilitate capital investments into these partners. So we don't do any investments into our partners. We provide grants, but they are in small amount related to the operational expenses.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Govanchi. And just following on from that, perhaps we can just touch on the operational aspect of the entity that can be funded by Water.org. There's a question just around that, if you can share any more information.
So the kind of funding that Water.org does is around, let's say, hiring of staff, training of the staff, marketing, but it's not related to, let's say, infrastructure in financial institutions. With utilities, it could be a broader set of expense areas that we can fund.
Okay, great, thank you.
And my colleague Dick is there online, I think. If he's there, he can also chime in. Dick, if you're there.
Great, absolutely. Ms. Pereira, if you're there and can shed some more light, please do.
Maybe not.
No problem at all. Dick, if you come through, later on we can include you in there as well. And so there's another question here just about how IAX assesses impact. And so perhaps there I'll jump in and talk a little bit about that process. And so at IAX, we ensure that women at the last mile essentially have a voice and a value within this, within the pre-issuance of our bonds, but also whilst we're constructing the portfolio, and it runs across the bond's tenure. And so as a first step, when we are screening potential portfolio companies during our due diligence process, we analyze their social, gender, and environmental impact performance, and basically ascertain whether they will be suitable to feature within the upcoming bonds, such as the WLB6. And once companies progress through these initial reviews, we proceed to a financial but also an impact due diligence phase, where we collect data from the field and from the women potential receivers of capital. And we gather data from personal interviews with these women, but also we utilize our IX Values platform to disseminate a set of questions to a wide sample size. And so that IX Values platform is essentially a survey that is disseminated to a large sample size of women in the field, asking basic questions around their income generation or improvements in their lives, and whether they've been empowered through different areas such as water and sanitation, education, these kinds of elements. And it enables us to gather thousands of data points, basically to analyze, but to also hear those personal stories from women about the impact that borrowers are having. And then from this process, we then develop and integrate these impact targets with the potential borrowers, and we will have a look at your impact performance across the bond's tenure as well. And essentially, we treat the impact performance in a similar way to we do financial. And then we continue this process on an ongoing basis during the lifetime of the bond with semi-annual impact reports that we essentially disseminate to investors as well. And so it gives you a little bit of an overview of how we treat impact when we develop the bonds. And so now I think we have quite a few more questions, but I'll start one more here is, what is the range of risk-adjusted interest rates that borrowers can expect to receive? And so perhaps I'll pass over to the Ms. Kaur or Ms. Jory to touch and shed a little bit of light on that one.
Sure. Thanks, George. Thanks for the question. So just to put it simply, the pricing is based on risk-adjusted pricing analysis that we do, and this is driven by the credit appraisal that we do of the borrowers. So it's based on credit appraisal of the company, the entity, the risk profile of the entity, the risk profile of the country, the entity is based on. Also, the market environment, especially in the last year when we all faced a very tough market environment. So we help balance that, plus what we were charging the borrowers. Also, our own bond economics. So it's a mix of these factors. And of course, we get to that stage once we've done the initial screening of the entities. So again, I would urge you to apply for the bond, and we can take it from there. Throughout the screening, we will be able to assess and give you a range of the pricing. I hope that answers your question, but please feel free to reach out to us. And I will also ask our team to put in the chat box our email ID where you can reach out to us. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ms. Kaur. And so now I'll go. We've got quite a few still open here. How to be a part of WLB6. I'll shed a little light on next steps shortly after our Q&A. But essentially, after this session, we will send some more information on how you can get involved and next steps with that. Second question here on will we be eligible if we do not have overseas operations or any past borrowing from overseas organizations in the past? I think, Ms. Jory, you touched on this a little bit earlier. I'm not sure if we have anything else to add on that. Please jump in if so. Otherwise, I'll move on to another question.
Yeah, I know that's well covered, George. I think I understood the question is if the entity is required to have any overseas operations. Could you clarify that, please?
Sure. So I think the question just is around, eligibility if they don't have overseas operations or past borrowing from overseas organizations. So perhaps this is pertaining to a company perhaps that works within multiple regions. I think that could be a shed light on that, maybe.
No, yeah. So like I covered earlier, and it's not a requirement, and it is not a mandate for the entity to have overseas operations or have past borrowing experience with overseas lenders. Your presence in your local geography is what we will also look at in terms of, like I mentioned, both the operational stability, sustainability, and the impact. Of course, if there is borrowing experience, it just makes the process easier, but we are still happy to support you with this and probably become your first foreign lender. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. And perhaps here, Mr. Granchi, you can come in and talk perhaps a little bit about water.org's footprint in Africa, but we have a question around being interested in part of a scheme. This audience member is from Uganda and works within water plumbing appliances and fittings, and was wondering perhaps if they qualify. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you can engage with water.org for this.
So we don't partner with enterprises, SMEs. We partner with utilities in infra space, and financial institutions is the other business line. So I'm happy to answer more questions. Please feel free to get in touch with me. But yeah, we don't partner with plumbing companies or enterprises in the value chain.
Great. Thank you very much there, Mr. Granchi. So move on to the next question here, which is about the minimum loan size provided by IAX. So perhaps again, I'll pass over to Ms. Jory or Ms. Kaur to talk a little bit about perhaps average loan sizes or the range that we use at IAX.
Sure. Thanks, George. So we're looking at a range of anywhere between 3 to 10 million for this bond. Of course, anything lower, again, we're happy to have a discussion, but basically we're looking at whether the entity is able to absorb that sort of capital, which again lies all based on credit assessment. But I hope that answers your question, anywhere between 3 to 10 million.
Great, thank you very much there, Ms. Kaur. And Mr. Granchi, there's another one here just around water.org and training courses for technical implementation for WASH infrastructure, and do you provide that at water.org? It'd be great if you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, we do, but it's in select countries in Indonesia and East Africa, countries in East Africa for now.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And perhaps I can relate into the second question, that how does an MFI in Cambodia get funding in water.org? So again, maybe you just touch on a little bit about getting involved and keeping in touch with water.org.
Yeah, sure. So our process starts with due diligence, and we see if there is a fit with their existing product and what we can do with their credit products on water and sanitation finance. So please get in touch with me. I can introduce them to our Cambodia office for the next steps.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Granchi. And please, if there are any more questions that anybody would like to ask, we still have a couple minutes that we can answer any more, or subsequently you can raise your hand if you'd like to ask the question through your audio as well. And if we don't have any more questions for today, perhaps then I can go on to the next steps and perhaps how you can get involved, and we can touch on how you can get involved in WLB6, but also a little bit more on the Orange Bond Initiative. Thank you, Ms. Kaur, Ms. Jory, and also Mr. Ghanshi there for a really interesting session on both IIX's and Water.org's work, in particular around the initiative, but also answering questions and going on to how people can get involved. And so if you're a prospective borrower and you're interested to participate in the WLB6, an upcoming Orange Bond, then first, we do actually have a form on borrower eligibility test that is on our website. And there's a survey there. It's a short survey that goes over your high-level eligibility criteria. We will then ascertain whether we can proceed to the next steps, and we'll set up an introductory call to discuss alignment within the WLB6. On passing the initial screening, IIX will get an NDA in place, and then we'll get a basic agreement to initiate the credit due diligence and impact verification in the upcoming months around June and July this year. Likewise, if you have any companies in your network that you would like to fulfill the criteria or would like to get in touch with us, our email is also there, and please also feel free to email us across on that as well. You can sign, we can set up a call then accordingly and discuss possible partnerships as well. For the Orange Bond Initiative, again, I would suggest perhaps signing the Orange Bond Pledge. Have a little look online. We do have that link and pledge on our website. And just by signing that pledge, again, there's no requirements or any resource requirements or time requirements or cost. However, it allows us to involve you in these conversations, and you can get more involved in transactions and hear about these opportunities to raise capital through gender equal finance. And finally, again, as Mr. Ghanshi mentioned, to learn more about the initiatives on Water.org, please, reach out to him, but also the Water.org team. There's his email there as well to please reach out and get involved in potential financing. And so with that, I'd like to move to closing the session. And once again, I'd like to thank Mr. Ghanshi and the Water.org team for partnering us on the steering committee of the Orange Bond Initiative, but also today in the session. And I'd also like to thank Ms. Garcha, Ms. Kaur, Ms. Jory in joining us and telling a little bit more about IIX and our WLB6. And to all our audience members, thank you for tuning in today. We hope you've been inspired to join and support the initiative, and we look forward to hearing from you later on. Do follow us on our social media channels on LinkedIn and Twitter to share more insights from the session, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you for joining and have a great day.